Hi there. Welcome back to Haunting Vales. Beneath the pale glow of the moon, a secret is whispered, a confession meant for no one to hear. But the night remembers everything. The Moonlight Confession begins where love, guilt, and betrayal collide under the silver sky, leaving behind a truth too heavy to bear. When a shocking crime unfolds in the stillness of night, Hercule Poirot steps into a world where every shadow hides remorse and every glance conceals a lie. The moonlight may reveal faces, but never intentions. And as Poirot listens closely to the confessions that echo through the dark, he realizes some sins cannot be washed away, even by dawn. Stay with us until the end, for in this mystery, the light of the moon may be the only witness left. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Haunting Vales, where every secret has its story. Chapter 1. The Confession Beneath the Moon. The night had fallen quiet over the English countryside, the kind of stillness that makes every sound seem louder than it should be. A clock ticked faintly in the drawing room of Langley Manor, echoing against the old oak panels. Outside, the moon hung low and silver, its light spilling over the gravel path and the dew-soaked hedges. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of roses and dust, the kind of smell that tells of a house both loved and forgotten. Hercule Poirot sat in an armchair near the fire, his small frame neat and still, his sharp eyes half hidden beneath the glow of the flames. Though age had bent his back slightly, there was nothing weary in his gaze. The firelight danced in his eyes like the reflection of a mind that never slept. Across from him sat Inspector Blake of the local constabulary, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who relied on instinct and habit rather than reflection. He rubbed his temples and sighed. "This case, Poirot, I can't make sense of it. The coroner says suicide, but it doesn't feel right." Poirot did not reply at once. His hands rested on his knees, fingers steepled. He spoke softly. "When something feels wrong, my friend, it is because something is wrong. The instinct. It is the whisper of the truth trying to be heard." Blake frowned, staring into the fire. "Then what truth are we missing?" Before Poirot could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Hesitant, slow, deliberate. The door opened, and a woman stepped inside. She was in her late 30s, dressed in morning black, her hair pinned neatly back though a few strands had escaped, catching the firelight. Her face was pale, almost too pale, as though she carried a secret that had burned her from within. "Mrs. Holcombe," Blake said, standing. "We didn't expect—" "I needed to speak," she interrupted, her voice low but steady. "I needed to tell someone before it eats me alive." Poirot looked up, calm but attentive. "Then, madam, you have chosen the right night and the right company. Please sit." She hesitated, then moved closer to the fire, folding her hands tightly in her lap. The silence stretched. The clock ticked again, each sound like a heartbeat. Finally, she spoke. "It happened 2 nights ago, the night of the full moon. You already know about my husband's death. They said he took his own life. But that's not true." Blake leaned forward. "Then what do you believe, Mrs. Holcombe?" Her eyes flicked toward Poirot, as if afraid of judgment. But his gaze remained still and kind. "I believe," she said, "he was murdered." The word hung in the air, heavy as a stone dropped into still water. Poirot's eyes didn't waver. "Then you must tell us everything, madam. From the beginning." She swallowed. "It began weeks ago. My husband, Richard, had become distant. He stopped sleeping. He spent hours walking through the gardens, muttering to himself. He said he was hearing things, a voice whispering outside his window. At first, I thought it was his nerves, but then I heard it too." Blake frowned. "A voice?" "Yes. Soft, low, but clear. It would come only at night, and always when the moon was full. It said his name, over and over again." Poirot's gaze moved slightly toward the window. The moonlight cast a long shadow across the carpet, cold and pale. "And what did your husband do when he heard it?" "He went outside one night. I begged him not to, but he said he needed to face it, to prove it was nothing." She shivered. "That was the last time I saw him alive." Blake shifted uneasily. "They found him by the lake, didn't they?" "Yes," she whispered. "He was lying beside the water, as though he'd been watching the reflection of the moon. The revolver was next to him. But his hand—" Her voice broke. "His hand was clean. No trace of powder. And he never owned a revolver." Poirot's eyes gleamed. Then the weapon was placed. And the hand, too perfect, too deliberate. "Tell me, madam, who knew your husband best?" "His business partner, Simon Harrow. And our maid, Clara. She's been with us for 10 years. Poirot nodded slowly. "Two people, then, one of profit, one of loyalty. The motives of greed and of love. Both are dangerous." The woman's gaze lowered to her lap. "There's more. The night after his death, I found something." Blake leaned forward. "What was it?" She hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket and drew out a folded piece of paper. It was creased, yellowed at the edges. She handed it to Poirot. He opened it carefully. It was a note, written in Richard Holcomb's firm, slanted hand. It read, "Forgive me. The truth is heavier than the sin." Poirot's brow furrowed. He asks for forgiveness, yet claims truth as a burden. Curious. This is not the letter of a man seeking escape. It is the letter of one who has learned too much. Blake looked at him. "You think someone forced his hand?" Poirot folded the note and handed it back. "I think, Inspector, that what appears to be a confession may in fact be a warning." The clock chimed midnight. A gust of wind slipped through the half-open window, stirring the curtains. Outside, the moon seemed to tremble in its reflection on the lake. The house felt colder now, as though the fire had dimmed. Poirot rose, taking his walking stick. "Madam, I would like to see your husband's study." She nodded silently, rising to her feet. "It's this way." They walked down the corridor, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The house creaked faintly, the kind of sound old homes make when they remember. The study was at the end, a narrow room with books lining the walls and a desk facing the window that overlooked the lake. Poirot entered first. He paused. Something was wrong. Not visibly, but silently wrong. A room can hold memory the way a body holds breath, and this one was still holding something. On the desk lay a single item, a silver locket. Poirot picked it up. Inside was a photograph of Mrs. Holcomb and a small boy. Their son, perhaps, though he wasn't mentioned. But the space beside the photograph was empty, as though a second image had been torn out. "Did your husband ever speak of anyone from his past?" Poirot asked quietly. Mrs. Holcomb stood at the door, her expression unreadable. "Only once. A woman named Evelyn. He said she died long ago, but he never spoke of her again." Poirot looked toward the window, the moonlight spilling across the glass. "And yet, she may have spoken to him beneath that same moon." Blake frowned. "You're suggesting the voice he heard was not imagination," Poirot finished softly, "but memory, a memory awakened by guilt." Mrs. Holcomb's hands trembled. "Then who killed him?" Poirot turned to her, his voice steady. "That, madam, is what I intend to find out. But tell me, did you ever hear your husband say the name Evelyn aloud?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, the night before he died. He whispered it in his sleep." Poirot's gaze returned to the window. The moon hung low, casting its reflection upon the lake. Two perfect circles of light, one real, one illusion. "Then the truth lies between them," he murmured, "between what is seen and what is reflected." Later that night, when Poirot retired to the guest room, he sat in the dim light of the bedside lamp, lost in thought. The note, the locket, the voice, they formed a pattern, faint but deliberate. He reached for his pocket notebook and wrote a single line. The confession was not his own. He closed the book, turned out the light, and lay back on the pillow. Outside, the moon shifted behind a cloud, and for a moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then, somewhere in the distance, faint but clear, a voice whispered, "Richard." Poirot's eyes opened. The voice came again, softer, almost sorrowful. "Richard." He rose from bed and moved to the window. The garden below lay still, the lake shimmering under the returning moonlight. There was no one there. No shadow, no movement, only silence. But Poirot stood very still, his heart calm but alert. For he knew one thing with certainty. The voice was not real, and yet it had meaning. Someone wanted him to believe in ghosts. But Poirot did not believe in ghosts. He believed in murderers. And somewhere, in the reflection of that silver moon, a murderer was watching. Chapter 2. The Whisper on the Lake. Morning broke slowly over Langley Manor, pale and uncertain, like the first breath after a long nightmare. The mist rolled off the lake in low curls, drifting through the hedges and across the gravel path. It carried a chill that seeped into the stones of the house and into the bones of those who dwelled within. Poirot stood by the window of his guest room, fully dressed, his posture straight and still. His eyes were fixed on the lake below, that calm, deceptive mirror where Richard Holcomb had met his end. In daylight, it seemed almost innocent, but Poirot knew better. Evil rarely shows itself under the sun. It hides in the ordinary. It waits. A knock came at the door. Inspector Blake entered, holding a folder under his arm and looking as though sleep had not found him. "Morning, Poirot. I brought the post-mortem report." Poirot turned slightly, offering a small nod. "And what does the good coroner conclude?" "Suicide, same as before," Blake replied. "Gunpowder residue on the sleeve, no sign of struggle. His fingerprints on the revolver." Poirot's brow rose faintly. "His fingerprints and no one else's? None that we could lift." "Curious," Poirot murmured. "When the evidence is too clean, it begins to smell." Blake frowned. "You think it's been staged?" Poirot moved to the small writing desk, placing a hand gently upon its surface. "The simplest crime, my friend, is rarely simple. Someone wanted you to see a tragedy, but what they truly performed was theater." He gestured toward the window. "Gulme, we go to the lake." The two men walked the narrow path that led down through the gardens. The air was thick with mist, curling around the hedges like white smoke. Birds called faintly from the trees, but their songs seemed distant, swallowed by the fog. The lake appeared before them, still, wide, perfectly circular, its surface unbroken except for a single fallen leaf drifting near the shore. A constable stood nearby, guarding the site where Richard Holcomb's body had been found. Poirot stepped closer, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the damp earth. He looked down at the spot marked by a wooden post. "This is where he was discovered." Blake nodded. "Right beside the water, gun in his right hand. No footprints other than his own." Poirot crouched low, examining the ground. The soil had hardened overnight, but faint impressions still lingered. "His shoes, yes," Poirot said softly. "But look here, these are lighter, smaller, perhaps a woman's. And they stop here." Blake leaned over. "Could be the maid?" "Perhaps," Poirot replied. "But why stop here and not come closer? Unless you wish to watch, unseen." He rose slowly, brushing the soil from his gloves. "Inspector, I wish to speak with the maid, Clara." Blake nodded. "She's in the kitchen. Shall I fetch her?" Poirot smiled faintly. No, let's go to her. A maid in her own domain will speak more freely than in ours." The kitchen of Langley Manor was a world apart from the grand rooms above. The smell of tea and soap lingered in the air, and the morning light spilled through the small windows, catching the copper pots that hung along the walls. Clara stood at the sink, a plain woman in her 40s with hands that looked worn from years of scrubbing. She turned as they entered, wiping her palms on her apron. "Good morning, sir." "Inspector." Poirot inclined his head. "Madam, forgive our intrusion. We seek only the truth." She nodded, glancing toward Blake, then back to Poirot. "I told the police all I knew." "Ah, yes," Poirot said gently. "But sometimes what we know changes when the light does. Tell me, you were close to Mr. Holcomb?" Her expression softened. He was a kind man, never cruel, never sharp with his words. He had a sadness, though, especially of late. Poirot studied her closely. "Did you see him on the night he died?" "Yes, sir. I brought him his tea around 9:30. He was in his study, staring out the window. He asked me to leave the tray and go to bed. Said he'd be up late." "And did you hear anything later? A sound, a voice, perhaps?" Clara hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward the door, as if someone might be listening. "I did, sir. Around midnight, I woke up. Thought I heard someone outside, by the garden path." Poirot's voice softened further. "A man? A woman?" "I couldn't tell. It was singing almost. Just a few words. A tune I didn't know." Poirot exchanged a look with Blake. "Singing," he repeated. "That is most interesting. Did you tell the police this?" "No, sir. I didn't think it mattered." "Ah, but it matters greatly," Poirot said, stepping closer. "For truth often hides in the smallest details." She wrung her hands nervously. "You think it was her, don't you?" "Her?" Poirot asked quietly. "The lady," Clara whispered. "The one in the locket. I saw her picture once, years ago, when I was dusting. Mr. Holcomb caught me looking and told me never to mention her. But I remember her face." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Describe her." "Dark hair, pale skin, eyes like she knew something you didn't." Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes, I think perhaps she knew far too much." When they returned to the main hall, Mrs. Holcomb was standing near the staircase, her hands resting on the banister. She looked pale, her expression distant. "Mrs. Holcomb," Poirot said softly, "we have spoken with Clara. She recalls hearing something near the gardens that night, a woman's voice." Her eyes widened. "Then it wasn't just Richard." "No, Poirot replied. It was not just Richard." She moved closer, lowering her voice. "There's something I didn't tell you yesterday. The morning after his death, I found footprints, small, light, outside the study window. I brushed them away before the police arrived." Blake's head snapped toward her. "You what?" "I was frightened," she whispered. "I didn't want them thinking I had anything to do with it." Poirot's expression remained calm. "Fear can make us foolish, madam, but not wicked. Yet now we must ask, who was she? Who came to your window that night beneath the moon?" Mrs. Holcomb shook her head slowly. "I don't know, but there's something else. 3 days before Richard died, he received a letter. No return address. When he read it, his face went white as chalk. He burned it in the fire without a word." Poirot's eyes flicked toward the fireplace. "A letter burned, a locket torn, a voice that sings." "Yes." The melody becomes clearer. He turned to Blake. "Inspector, we must visit Mr. Simon Harrow, the business partner. A man who profits by another's death is seldom far from guilt." Simon Harrow's offices were in the nearby town of Marbury, above a row of antique shops and a quiet tailor. The sign on the frosted glass door read, "Harrow and Holcomb Investments." The man himself greeted them with a nervous smile. He was in his 40s, thin, well-dressed, his hair carefully parted, his eyes too watchful. "Inspector, Mr. Poirot, I heard you were involved. Terrible business, Richard's death." "Indeed," Poirot said lightly. "It is always terrible when a man's life ends before his work does, especially when that work involves large sums of money." Harrow's lips tightened. "If you're suggesting—" "I suggest nothing," Poirot interrupted mildly. "I only observe. For example, this office is tidy, yet the ledger on your desk is open to last month's figures. A month before Mr. Holcomb's death." Harrow frowned. "I was reviewing them." "Then you will not mind if I ask, What caused the sudden loss in the company's accounts? Harrow stiffened. A bad investment. Richard's idea. He took full responsibility. Ah, Poirot murmure. And when he died, you were free of that burden? Harrow's face darkened. You've no right. Blake stepped forward. Easy now. Just answer the questions. Harrow sank back in his chair, jaw clenched. Richard was troubled. He said someone was blackmailing him. Said if he didn't pay, everything would be ruined. Poirot tilted his head. And did he tell you who this someone was? No, but he received a call the night before he died. After that, he locked himself in his study. When I saw him the next morning, he looked haunted. Poirot nodded slowly. Yes, haunted is the right word. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Tell me, Mr. Harrow, do you ever visit Langley Manor? Once or twice, Harrow replied, but not recently. Poirot's gaze lingered on the man's shoes. Small flecks of dried soil near the heel. Clay soil, the kind found near the lake. He said nothing, but his mind was already moving. That evening, Poirot returned to the manor alone. The air was colder now, the fog thicker. The lake gleamed faintly in the moonlight, silver and still. He walked to the edge, the gravel crunching softly underfoot. Somewhere in the reeds, an owl called. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, faintly it came again. The whisper, low, haunting, carried across the water. Richard, Poirot froze. The sound was real. Not imagination, not memory, real. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the shadows. Who is there? He called. Silence. Then, a figure. A woman's silhouette, standing near the far side of the lake. Her dress fluttered in the wind. The moonlight touched her face, pale, distant, and gone before he could move. Poirot's heart quickened. He stepped closer, but she vanished into the mist. For a long moment, he stood alone by the lake, the water reflecting the trembling moon. He spoke softly to the air. So, the ghost walks. But ghosts, they do not leave footprints, nor do they whisper through telephones. He turned back toward the manor, his expression grim. Tomorrow, he would return to the study. Tomorrow, he would unmask the living ghost. Chapter 3. The Shadow Beneath the Truth. The following morning, Langley Manor seemed even quieter than before. The kind of quiet that presses against the walls and seeps into every corner. The mist had lifted, but the stillness remained, heavy as a veil. Poirot stood once again in Richard Holcomb's study, sunlight filtering through the lace curtains, the dust in the air catching the light like drifting ash. On the desk lay the same locket, the same pen, the same faint ring of tea on the wood. But something had changed, not in the objects, but in what they meant. Poirot's gloved hand moved over the desk's surface, slow, careful. Then he leaned closer to the window, where faint smudges marked the frame, small, circular, like fingerprints, but too high for an ordinary touch. He turned as the door opened behind him. Inspector Blake entered, holding a small envelope. Morning, Poirot. Thought you'd want to see this. Came in from Marbury. Forensics report on the revolver. Poirot took the envelope and opened it. Inside, a single page. His eyes scanned it quickly. Then he looked up. Ah, as I expected. Blake frowned. What's that? The gun, Inspector, was wiped clean before the body was found. Only Mr. Holcomb's fingerprints were added after. They were pressed, not natural. Blake's eyebrows lifted. Pressed? Oui. Poirot stopped himself and smiled faintly. Yes, pressed. As though someone placed his fingers onto the gun once he was already gone. Neat. Calculated. But not perfect. Blake sighed, rubbing his chin. It was murder. Poirot nodded. Murder disguised as despair. And a disguise, my friend, always tells you more about the wearer than the truth itself. He turned back to the window. But our murderer is clever. Too clever. Which means they will have made one mistake. Something small, something human. And that is where we shall find them. Blake stepped beside him. And the woman you saw last night? Poirot's eyes narrowed. She was not a ghost. Of that I am certain. But she wished to be seen. That was her error. Later that morning, Poirot requested that Mrs. Holcombe join him in the study. She entered quietly, her hands clasped before her, her expression worn. "Mrs. Holcombe," Poirot said softly, "you have been most brave. But there is more you have not yet shared. Something about your husband's past." Her eyes flickered, uncertain. "I've told you all I know." Poirot gestured toward the locket on the desk. "The woman inside. Evelyn. He said she was long dead." "How do you know?" She hesitated. "He told me himself. Years ago, before we married. He said she had drowned. He never spoke of her again." Poirot murmure. "A man says a woman is dead, yet she still walks the garden at night. It seems death does not always end a story." Mrs. Holcombe's voice trembled. "Are you saying she's alive?" Poirot did not answer at once. Instead, he walked to the bookshelf, running a finger along the spines. Then he stopped at a gap, a missing book. "There was a volume here," he said softly. "Look, dust outlines its absence. Recently removed." Blake looked around. Could have been anyone. Poirot shook his head. Not anyone. Someone who knew what it contained. He turned to Mrs. Holcombe. "Do you know what book was here?" She blinked. "Yes. It was a diary. My husband's. He wrote every day. I thought it was still here." Poirot's eyes darkened slightly. "Then someone took it, and they took it after his death." Mrs. Holcombe's face went pale. "But who?" "That," Poirot said, "is what we're going to find out." An hour later, Poirot and Blake questioned Clara again. The maid stood near the door, her fingers twisting nervously. "Clara," Poirot began gently, "since Mr. Holcombe's passing, has anyone entered the study without permission?" She shook her head quickly. "No one, sir. Not that I've seen." Poirot studied her face. "Not that you've seen, yes. But what about what you've heard?" She hesitated. "There was someone last night, after midnight. I heard the door open. I thought it was you, sir." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Describe what you heard." "Soft steps. Someone moving toward the study. I heard the latch click, then silence. When I looked for my room a few minutes later, the corridor was empty." Blake frowned. "You didn't see who it was?" "No, sir." Poirot nodded slowly. "Then our thief is among us still." He turned toward the door. "Come, Inspector. We shall take a walk by the lake once more. I believe the water still remembers." By afternoon, the sky had grown overcast. The lake's surface was dull and gray now, the moon's reflection replaced by clouds that rolled like smoke. Poirot stood at the water's edge, staring into the shallows. His reflection stared back, distorted by ripples. He crouched, eyes scanning the ground. Then he saw it, a small object half buried in mud. He reached down and lifted it carefully. A matchbox, brass edges, faded lettering. He opened it. Inside, a small piece of torn paper. Blake leaned closer. "What's that?" Poirot unfolded it slowly. Just 3 words were written in faint pencil, "Under the willow." Blake turned toward the line of trees at the far end of the lake. "There's a willow over there." "Indeed," Poirot said softly. "And secrets, they like shade." They crossed the path, their footsteps muffled on the wet ground. The willow loomed above them, its branches hanging low, brushing the water. Beneath its roots, the earth was darker, softer. Poirot knelt, using his cane to push aside the soil. Something caught the light, metal, thin, round. He drew it out. A key. Blake frowned. A key to what? Poirot turned it over. Not a door, Inspector. Something smaller, more private. He looked toward the house. Perhaps a drawer, or a box. They returned to the manor. Poirot moved through the halls with purpose now, each step measured. In the study, he examined the desk again. The drawers were locked. He tried the key, and it fit perfectly. Inside lay papers, folded neatly. At the top of the stack, a letter, and signed, written in the same firm hand as the note found beside the body. He read aloud. Evelyn has returned. She knows. If I do not end it, she will. Forgive me, my love. Blake exhaled slowly. So he was being blackmailed? Poirot's eyes moved across the page. Perhaps, but not for money. He lifted another sheet. It was a photograph, old, black and white, edges curled with age. 3 people stood together. Richard Holcomb, Simon Harrow, and a woman, Evelyn. Poirot held the photograph closer. Look at their faces. She stands between them, but closer to Holcomb. And yet, it is Harrow who looks at her. Not with friendship, with jealousy. Blake's jaw tightened. You think Harrow killed him? Poirot shook his head. I think jealousy began the story, but it did not end it. No, this is older. Deeper. Evelyn did not drown. She was erased. He placed the photo down carefully. And now, she has returned. Evening settled once more over the manor. Rain began to fall, slow and deliberate, tapping against the windows like the ticking of a clock. Poirot sat by the fire, the diary pages spread before him. He read in silence, each line revealing more of the man Richard Holcomb once was. Evelyn wrote again. She says she has proof. I cannot sleep. The lake calls to me, the place where it began. Poirot leaned back, the firelight flickering over his face. Proof, he whispered. Always it is the proof that kills. The door opened softly. Mrs. Holcomb entered, her face drawn. You found something, haven't you? Yes, madam. And soon I shall find everything. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. If Evelyn is alive, what does she want? Poirot looked into the flames. To be seen, to be heard, and perhaps to be avenged. She sank into the chair opposite him, her eyes glistening. I just want this to end. It will, Poirot said quietly. But endings, madam, are seldom kind. Later that night, Poirot could not sleep. The rain had stopped, but the air remained thick, heavy with silence. He rose from his bed and lit a lamp. As he walked through the corridor, he caught a faint glimmer of movement near the study door. A shadow, then the soft click of a latch. He moved quietly forward. The door was slightly open. Inside, a figure stood by the desk, rifling through the papers. Good evening, Mr. Harrow, Poirot said gently. Harrow froze. The lamplight caught his face, pale, strained. His hand trembled slightly over the drawer. Poirot, I thought no one was awake. Ah, but murder rarely sleeps, Poirot said softly. You came to retrieve something, yes? Perhaps a letter? Harrow's voice broke. You don't understand. Then make me understand. He sank into the chair, his composure crumbling. She was supposed to be dead. Evelyn. She fell from the bridge 10 years ago. Richard blamed himself. We both did. We thought it was over. Poirot listened silently. Then she wrote to him. Said she'd survived. Said she'd tell everyone what really happened unless he paid her. He was terrified. He said he'd handle it. Then he was gone. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And so you came here last night. Not to mourn, but to destroy the proof. Harrow nodded weakly. I couldn't let it ruin us all. Ah, Poirot said softly. But you see, the proof is not paper. It breathes. It walks. And I believe, Mr. Harrow, it whispers. Harrow looked up, confusion clouding his face. What do you mean? Poirot turned toward the window. I mean, Evelyn never wrote those letters. Someone used her name. Someone close enough to know her story and yours. Someone who wished to see you both destroyed. The clock struck midnight. Poirot stood by the window, looking once more toward the lake. The rain had stopped, but the water gleamed faintly, catching the light of the moon that had returned from behind clouds. And in that pale glow, he saw it again. A figure by the willow. Still, waiting. He turned to Harrow. Come, my friend. It is time we met the ghost. They crossed the garden in silence. The night air was cold, damp with mist. When they reached the willow, the figure turned slowly toward them. It was a woman, alive, real. Her face pale, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes hollow, but burning with something fierce. "Evelyn," Harrow whispered. She smiled faintly. "So you do remember me." Poirot stepped forward. "You are not dead." "No," she said softly, "but I might as well have been. You left me to drown in that river while you both built your fortunes." Harrow's voice shook. "It was an accident." "Was it?" she whispered. "Tell that to the man who begged you to save me." Poirot's eyes glinted. Richard tried to save her and failed, and that failure was his punishment ever since. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "He came to me last month, begged forgiveness, said he would tell the truth. I thought he meant it." Poirot's tone lowered, but someone silenced him before he could. She looked up sharply. "You mean Harrow?" Poirot turned to Harrow, his gaze steady. "No, Harrow is weak, but not cruel. The one who killed Richard knew the truth, and feared it most." He turned slowly toward the house. "We return, my friends. The final act awaits inside." Chapter 4: The Moonlight Confession. The drawing room of Langley Manor was drenched in silence. Only the faint hiss of the dying fire broke the stillness, its glow flickering across faces pale with unease. Poirot stood near the window, his back straight, his eyes fixed on the reflection of those gathered behind him. Inspector Blake, Mrs. Holcombe, Simon Harrow, and Evelyn herself. Outside, the moon shimmered over the lake like a shard of silver glass, the willows swaying in the wind as though listening. Poirot turned slowly. "My friends," he began softly, "tonight the shadows that have long haunted this house will speak, and once they have spoken, they will trouble you no more." No one moved. He stepped closer to the hearth. "For days, we have believed that Richard Holcombe took his own life, a man crushed by guilt, haunted by a woman long thought dead. But the truth, as always, hides beneath the appearance." He looked at Evelyn. "Madam, you returned not to destroy him, but to forgive him. Did you not?" Her voice trembled. "Yes. I wanted him to know I was alive, to tell the truth at last. He said he would. That night, he sent word for me to come to the lake at midnight. But he never came." Poirot nodded. "No, because by then, he was already dead." Inspector Blake leaned forward. "So who did it, Poirot?" Poirot's eyes drifted toward Mrs. Holcombe. She stood motionless by the mantel, her fingers clenched tight around a silk handkerchief. Poirot's voice softened. "Madam, I must ask you to sit." She hesitated. "Why?" "Because," he said quietly, "you are about to hear the truth that your heart already knows." He walked slowly across the room. "Let us begin with the letter found beside the body, written, supposedly, by Richard himself. But it was not his letter. The handwriting was precise, careful, yet missing his natural slant. It was imitation, a forgery." He turned to the table. The revolver, too, was cleaned, his fingerprints pressed onto it after death. A detail too deliberate for despair. Only one person had both access and reason to hide the truth, the one who feared Evelyn's return the most. Mrs. Holcombe's voice broke. "What are you saying?" Poirot looked at her gently. "That you, madam, did not merely fear losing your husband. You feared losing everything. The name, the home, the life built upon a lie." She shook her head violently. "No, I loved him. I would never." "But love," Poirot interrupted softly, "can wear many masks. Yours was the love that would rather destroy than lose. When you learned Evelyn was alive, you panicked. You found his diary. You read his plans to confess. And you acted." Her breath came short, uneven. "You have no proof." Poirot turned toward the desk. "On the night of his death, a lamp was knocked from this table. The oil spilled, but there is no mark on the carpet beneath, because the rug was replaced. And beneath it, Mrs. Holcombe, the old stain remains. A mark of lamp oil, mixed with powder from the revolver. The struggle was here, in this room. You shot him when he refused to keep your secret. Blake's eyes widened. Good Lord. Evelyn rose slowly, tears brimming. He wanted to tell the truth, didn't he? He wanted to free himself from all of it. Poirot nodded. Yes. He wished to atone. But in trying to protect what she had, Mrs. Holcombe ensured the very ruin she feared. Mrs. Holcombe's voice cracked. I didn't mean to kill him. I only wanted to stop him from going to her. He said he'd ruin us both. He panicked when the gun went off. Poirot stepped closer, his tone calm, almost sorrowful. And then, Madam, you staged his despair. You placed the letter. You pressed his fingers upon the weapon. You turned murder into tragedy. For a moment, the room was utterly still. Only the faint sobbing of Evelyn filled the silence. Blake exhaled heavily. It's over then. Poirot looked at Mrs. Holcombe. No, Inspector. Nothing is ever truly over. It merely changes form. For guilt, like the shadow of the moon, never leaves the water. It only drifts beneath it. Mrs. Holcombe was led away quietly, her face pale, her eyes hollow. Evelyn stood near the fire, her gaze fixed on the flames. Poirot approached her gently. You have suffered much, madam, but tonight the truth is free, and so are you. She smiled faintly, her voice breaking. And him. Poirot looked toward the window, where the moonlight rippled across the lake. He too is free. The truth has found him, and that, perhaps, is mercy. Evelyn's tears fell silently. Blake placed a hand on Poirot's shoulder. Another case closed, Poirot. Poirot smiled faintly. Closed, yes, but not forgotten. The dead, mon ami, they speak still, not in words, but in the echo of our choices. As they left Langley Manor, the dawn began to break. The mist rose from the lake one final time, curling around the willow like a farewell. Poirot paused at the edge of the garden, looking back at the manor silhouetted against the pale morning sky. The world, he murmured, is full of secrets buried beneath silence. And sometimes it takes the shadow of death for the truth to find the light. He adjusted his hat, and with one last glance at the water, walked on down the path. The case of Langley Manor was done, but in the still water of the lake, a single ripple spread and was gone. And so ends another case for Hercule Poirot, where truth was mercy, and mercy was the final justice. If you enjoyed this mystery, my friends, do not forget, the next secret waits just beyond the fog.